Meanwhile, Michael Jackson is freed in a motherfucker smelling like little boys' booty holes, and I'm supposed to be excited.
Katt Williams just breaks silence on Michael Jackson and leaves the world shocked during a candid interview at the Vulture Festival. Though Williams has built his career on sharp, outspoken comedy, he now recognizes how his Michael Jackson jokes contributed to a damaging narrative against black men. So stick with me, because we're about to dive deep into the moment Katt Williams pulled back the curtain. Trust me, you'll want to stay till the very end, because the final 60 seconds? Yeah, that's where jaws truly hit the floor. Katt Williams finally speaks out about Michael Jackson. Katt Williams, the larger-than-life comedian we all know for his loud suits, lightning-fast comebacks, and raw, no-holds-barred humor, is sitting down at the Vulture Festival. You'd probably expect him to come in guns blazing, right? Maybe crack a few jokes, roast a couple folks, and just do that classic Katt Williams thing we've seen a million times. But no, this time something was different. The room had this heavy pause as he opened up, and not in the usual "I'm telling a joke but also making a point" kind of way. This was raw, unfiltered, and to be honest, it threw a lot of people off in the best and most unexpected way. The big moment came when the interviewer brought up his 2006 comedy special, The Pimp Chronicles Part 1. Specifically, those controversial jokes he made about Michael Jackson. Remember those? They were bold, biting, and had that signature Katt Williams flair that made people laugh while also cringe a little. Okay, we've heard Katt roast celebrities before, but this is next level. He finally spoke up about Michael Jackson, and what he said was both hilarious and uncomfortably honest. Did he go too far? Or did he finally say what no one else had the guts to? Don't blink, because by the end of this video, your whole opinion might just flip. And trust me, you'll want to hear every last second of this one. In this interview, Katt just came out with it. No sugarcoating, no deflection. He said, "I shouldn't have, honestly." Just like that. Can you imagine? The same man who never flinches, who will call out celebrities, politicians, and social norms without blinking, sat there and admitted he messed up. Like, really messed up. That alone felt like watching Superman take off his cape and say, "Yeah, I flew too close to the sun." And then he went even deeper, because it wasn't just a simple oops. Katt started peeling back the layers, talking about why he regretted those jokes. And what he said next? Woo! He explained that sometimes the very reason people in power let you rise is because you're willing to tear down your own kind. It's not just about telling jokes anymore. It's about how those jokes land, who they hurt, and what systems they help reinforce. Like, have you ever stopped to think about how often we laugh at things that maybe we shouldn't be laughing at? That's what he was getting at. And hearing him say it, that hit different. It was like watching someone hold a mirror up to their past self and go, "Damn, I was part of the problem." Then came the real gut punch. He admitted those jokes came from a place of pain. And not just random pain, but a very specific kind of pain. Disappointment in someone he once idolized. Those were the jokes of a guy that was hurt, you know, by an icon, he said. Now that made everybody stop in their tracks. Because we've all been there in some way, haven't we? When someone you looked up to doesn't live up to the image you built in your head. And instead of crying about it or having some deep therapy session, Katt turned it into comedy. But years later, sitting in front of a crowd of fans and media people, he looked back at that version of himself and basically said, "Yeah, that was me hurting." And you know what's shocking? Fans weren't expecting this. I mean, Katt has built a whole career on being unapologetic. That's why people love him. He's the guy who says what everyone's thinking, but is too scared to say. So to see him get all reflective and emotional and even a little vulnerable, that was jarring in a good way. It was like peeling back the gold-plated armor and realizing there's still a human under there, figuring things out just like the rest of us. But the moment that probably had everyone grabbing their chest and going, "Wait, what?" was when Katt brought up Janet Jackson. Yes, that Janet. He talked about how, despite everything he'd said about her brother, Janet still told him years later that she loved him. Can you imagine being in that moment? Like, after all the heat, all the backlash, and all the self-questioning, to have someone like Janet Jackson offer you grace? That kind of forgiveness? That's rare. And Katt knew it. He said it was one of the most magnificent things, and you could just tell it meant everything to him. Because when you're a comedian, especially one like Katt, the laughs don't always come free. There's a cost. And he said it best. I say a lot of hilarious shit, but it costs me every time. I'm never unscathed in these situations. Whew, that line right there, that stays with you. And yet, even after all this, after the regrets, the confessions, the emotional unpacking, Katt didn't throw in the towel. He didn't say, "I'm done," or "I should have stayed quiet." No, he still stood on something important, his mission. He said he sees himself as a black superhero, and despite all the mistakes and missteps, he's still committed to doing what he believes someone in his position should do. And let's be real, how many people would even dare to say that out loud? To admit the toll it takes, to admit you've caused harm, but still choose to walk in your purpose anyway. At the end of the day, this wasn't just another celebrity interview. It was a moment. A rare, transparent, damn near therapeutic moment where a man who's made the world laugh for decades let us see the weight he carries underneath all that humor. And honestly, it made him even more real. Because comedy isn't just about punchlines and timing, it's often about pain and survival and trying to make sense of a world that doesn't always make sense. And Katt? He just let us in on that process. And isn't that something worth talking about? So, what do you think? Did this moment change how people see Katt Williams? Maybe. But more importantly, it reminded everyone watching that even the most fearless voices have moments of doubt, reflection, and deep humanity. And if Katt Williams can admit when he's wrong, maybe there's hope for the rest of us too. The jokes that sparked controversy. Katt's whole relationship with the idea of Michael Jackson has been sitting right there in his comedy, just playing out slowly on stage, special after special, with the audience watching, sometimes laughing, sometimes cringing, but always listening. Now, Katt Williams, he's never exactly been shy, right? If there was an elephant in the room, he wasn't just going to point at it, he was going to jump on its back, ride it across the stage, and crack jokes about its tusks. That's his thing. From the beginning, he carved out a space for himself as the comic who says what everyone else is too scared to say out loud. And he straight up went for it, diving into all the controversy surrounding Michael Jackson. Like, not just skating around it with innuendo, but literally jumping headfirst into the deep end, talking about the allegations, the plastic surgeries, the way Michael looked, the way he acted, even the names he gave his kids. Remember the blanket joke? Yeah, that came from that set. And here's the thing, people laughed. Hard. Why? Because at the time, society was kind of in that weird space where Michael Jackson was still this global icon, but also constantly under the microscope. Katt wasn't making those jokes in a vacuum. He was reflecting what a lot of people were already whispering about. It was edgy. It was uncomfortable. But it was also real. Like, whether you agreed with him or not, there was no denying that he was putting into words the complicated mess of thoughts so many people were wrestling with about Michael Jackson back then. And let's be honest, not a lot of comedians had the guts to do that on such a big stage. But Katt being Katt, it wasn't just about getting laughs. His comedy has always walked that tightrope between funny and painful. Like, you laugh, but you also feel a little weird inside. You catch yourself thinking, wait, should I even be laughing at this? That's kind of his magic, but also his curse. He's said before, I say a lot of hilarious shit, but it costs me every time. And when you hear him say that now, especially with the Michael Jackson stuff, you can tell it's not just about critics or haters. It's personal. It's like he knew, even back then, that poking at someone like Michael Jackson wasn't just risky, it was heavy. Emotionally, culturally, spiritually even. So fast forward to today, and now you've got Katt opening up, talking more honestly than ever before, almost like he's circling back to those old routines and seeing them through a different lens. He's not exactly saying, I wish I hadn't said it, but more like, yeah, that stuff hurt. Maybe more than I let on. And that's where it gets really human. Because how many times do we all say or do stuff that seems right in the moment, but later makes us pause? Like, have you ever made a joke you thought was funny, only to realize much later how deep it actually cut, not just for others, but for you too? And still, in true Katt fashion, he's not apologizing in that PR scripted, bland kind of way. He's standing firm in who he is. I have no regrets, he says. In each situation, I am trying to do what the black superhero in my position would do. Phew, that line hits hard. Because whether you love him or hate him, he's telling you straight up. He sees himself as someone carrying the weight of saying the unsayable for the people who don't have a mic or a Netflix special to say it for themselves. That's not just comedy for him, that's a mission. But isn't it surprising to think about how comedy ages? Like, what was considered hilarious or cutting edge back then might feel downright wrong now. And the crazy part is, Katt seems to know that. He's not pretending his old stuff didn't hit some nerves. In fact, he's kind of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, some of those jokes about Michael Jackson were less about roasting a celebrity and more about dealing with something deeper. Society's obsession with fame, our conflicting feelings about our icons, and maybe even Katt's own relationship with pain and honesty on stage. So yeah, if you've ever watched those old specials and wondered, damn, why is he going so hard on MJT? Well, now we know a little more. It wasn't just for laughs. It was layered, messy, and complicated, just like real life. And now, hearing him talk about it in hindsight, it's like you're seeing the full picture for the first time. The jokes, the laughter, the backlash, the weight, it all comes together. And honestly, isn't that what great comedy does? It makes you laugh, but then it sticks with you. Makes you think, makes you feel. And Katt? He's still out here doing that, still wrestling with the cost of being the one to speak up, still figuring out where the funny ends and the real begins. And if that's not the sign of someone who really cares about what they do and what it does to people, I don't know what is. What on earth did Katt Williams just say about Michael Jackson that left fans speechless? And what's this deep regret he's finally owning up to? If you think you've heard it all, trust me, you haven't. Stay with us, because the twist at the end might just change the way you see both of them. The deeper meaning behind the regret. Okay, so let's really talk about this whole Katt Williams and Michael Jackson thing, because wow, there's a lot more going on beneath the surface than people realize. You know how sometimes someone says one little sentence and it just opens up a whole can of worms? That's what happened with Katt. Behind that unexpected admission he made about Michael Jackson is this deep, tangled story that's honestly heartbreaking, eye-opening, and at times kind of jaw-dropping when you think about it. Because what he said? It wasn't just about Michael. It was about himself, his pain, his past, and, honestly, the world around him too. Like, have you ever heard someone joke so hard it almost sounds like they're crying underneath? That's kind of what Katt's whole career has been built on. And when you start peeling back the layers, you begin to see that this man, this bold, outrageous, no-filter comic, is actually carrying around a ton of weight. Let's rewind a little. Katt Williams, whose real name is Micah, didn't exactly have the smoothest start in life. Did you know he was legally emancipated from his parents at just 13 years old? 13. Most kids that age are still learning how to cook ramen properly. But there he was, figuring out life all on his own, completely detached from any sort of family structure. That kind of early independence might sound badass on the outside, but imagine the kind of emotional scars that leaves behind. And honestly, is it any surprise that someone who's been on their own since childhood would grow up learning how to use humor as both a sword and a shield? That brings us to his comedy. People love to laugh at Katt's outrageous takes, his wild energy, and his brutal honesty. But what if that comedy is really just him trying to deal with his own internal chaos? Because, make no mistake, he's been through it. Legal issues, arrests, public meltdowns, beef with other celebrities, you name it. He's probably lived it. And in the middle of all that, he's trying to raise 8 kids. 8, 7 of whom he adopted. Like, how do you balance being a dad to that many children while trying to keep your own demons from swallowing you whole? What's wild is that research actually backs this up. Comedians are statistically more likely to deal with mental health issues. They tend to score higher on creativity tests, especially those who struggle with bipolar disorder or depression. And honestly, it makes sense. The best jokes often come from the darkest places. You ever notice how some of the funniest people you know are the ones who've been through the most? Yeah, that's not a coincidence. Comedy becomes this clever little disguise, a way to say, "I'm fine," while silently screaming into the void. Now, Katt's confession about Michael Jackson, that wasn't just random. It came from a place of deep, painful realization. He said something that hit hard. That part of the reason he got so famous was because he was willing to tear down other black icons. Let that sink in. He's basically saying, I got rewarded for trashing someone who looked like me. That's some real, raw truth. And honestly, how often do we see that play out in Hollywood? In the media? We celebrate the clapbacks, the exposés, the scandals, but who's really benefiting from all that drama? And at what cost? Katt seems to be realizing that now, like he's waking up to the bigger picture. And it's not just about Michael Jackson, even though MJ is one of the biggest examples. It's about the way society kind of pushes black entertainers into this weird, unspoken role where they're expected to be both the joke and the jester. They're supposed to entertain, to exaggerate, to make themselves the punchline, until suddenly they become disposable. And Katt's not having that anymore. You can hear it in the way he talks about identity. He's said that black people have lost their identity, and you can tell he's not just pointing fingers. He's holding a mirror up to himself, too. It's like he's finally realizing that maybe, just maybe, tearing others down didn't make him powerful, It just made him useful to people who never had his best interests at heart. Isn't that a chilling thought? That the higher he climbed, the more disconnected he became from the community he came from? That the applause he got wasn't because he was uplifting anyone, but because he was doing the dirty work of dragging his own kind? Ew. And here's the thing, comedy can be a powerful force for change. Like, when done right, it can shake up systems, challenge the status quo, and give a voice to the voiceless. But it's a razor-sharp line. As Rutgers professor Lauren Feldman puts it, comedy shouldn't mock the issues themselves. It should go after the power dynamics that cause those issues. Otherwise, it just ends up reinforcing the same problems it claims to challenge. And that's where Katt's regret comes in. It's like he finally sees that he wasn't punching up. He was punching sideways, and sometimes even down. So now we're seeing a different side of him, a more self-aware, reflective Katt who's trying to undo some of the harm, even if he can't erase it. And maybe that's why this confession about Michael Jackson hit so differently. It wasn't about dragging MJ. It was about acknowledging his own role in a much bigger, messier system. A system that profits off black pain, that rewards division, and that turns comedians into cautionary tales if they're not careful. In a way, Katt Williams is trying to reclaim his narrative. He's not just the loud, controversial comic anymore. He's someone who's been bruised by life, who's trying to make sense of the damage, and who's slowly starting to realize that maybe the real punchline was never funny to begin with. And honestly, that kind of vulnerability, that kind of honesty, that's something we rarely see in the world of celebrity, and it's powerful. So, behind that little quote about Michael Jackson is a whole world of pain, truth, growth, and maybe, just maybe, healing. Because sometimes, the people who make us laugh the hardest are the ones crying the most when the lights go off. And isn't that something we all need to remember? What happens when Katt Williams, never one to bite his tongue, finally speaks his truth about the king of pop? And what on earth does Janet Jackson have to say about it? Trust me, you're not ready for how deep and surprisingly emotional this gets. Stick around till the end, because the last twist is the part everyone is talking about. Janet Jackson's response and public forgiveness. On one interview with Katt Williams, he drops this bombshell about Janet Jackson. Yes, Janet, as in Ms. Rhythm Nation, Control, Icon Living. And the way he brought her up, it hit different. He was talking about how she reacted to those jokes he made years ago about her brother, the Michael Jackson. Now, let's be real for a second. Most people would have expected her to clap back hard, or at the very least, ice him out forever, right? I mean, who jokes about Michael Jackson and walks away unscathed, especially when his sister is still around and deeply protective of his legacy? But here's where it gets surprising in the most beautiful way possible. Katt said Janet Jackson didn't come at him with hate or even disappointment. Nope, she came with love. Let that sink in. Love. Not bitterness, not a cold shoulder, not even some passive-aggressive shade on social media. Just pure human grace. According to Katt's own words at the Vulture Festival, his voice literally cracking with emotion, Janet told him she still loved him. Still. As in, even after the jokes, even after the controversy, even after the possible hurt, she held space for him in her heart. Can you imagine that? Like, how do you even process something that heavy? And you could see how much it shook him, not in a bad way, but in a soul-stirring, life-altering kind of way. This wasn't just a celebrity being kind to another celebrity. This was about being seen, being forgiven, and being held with grace when you least expect it. You could hear it in his tone, the way his voice softened, the way he paused mid-sentence like he was still trying to wrap his own head around it. It wasn't the kind of forgiveness that gets tossed around for PR points or to make headlines. No, this was the real deal. Deep, grounded, almost spiritual. And that moment, it meant the world to him. He said, and I'm quoting loosely here, that Janet still loving him despite those jokes was one of the most magnificent things that had ever happened to him. Now, when someone like Katt, who has made a whole career out of not sugarcoating anything, calls something magnificent, you better believe it shook him to the core. You could almost tell he was still carrying that forgiveness with him like a badge of honor. Not out of pride, but out of sheer gratitude. Because honestly, how often do we get that kind of grace from someone we think we might have hurt? Let's not forget, this is a man whose entire brand has been about saying what no one else will say. Taking shots at everyone from public figures to pop culture icons, without ever asking for permission or forgiveness. But Janet's reaction, it made him stop and rethink. Really rethink. Like, maybe comedy doesn't always have to come at someone's expense. Maybe it can be funny without being cruel. Maybe, just maybe, you can still be fearless without being heartless. And don't we all need that kind of reminder sometimes? It was like she gave him this emotional permission to be more than just the guy with the mic and the jokes. She saw the man behind the punchlines, and that's a kind of healing most people never get to experience, let alone talk about publicly. You could tell it wasn't just about the jokes or about Michael anymore. It was about learning that real love, real grown love, isn't just about protecting what's dear to you. It's about having enough peace in your spirit to forgive when no one expects you to. Isn't that something? Honestly, that one moment between Janet and Katt says so much about who they both are. Her quiet strength and emotional intelligence, and his capacity for reflection and growth, even after years of being the loudest voice in the room. It's one of those rare, raw human moments in Hollywood that doesn't feel manufactured or staged. It just feels real. And you know what? Sometimes, it's the unexpected kindness that ends up teaching you the biggest lessons. Now, when Katt Williams sat there tearing up and talking about Janet Jackson's grace, it wasn't just another celebrity anecdote. It was a whole testimony on how forgiveness can change someone. And in a world where everyone's quick to cancel, drag, or clap back, Janet choosing love? That's a flex that speaks louder than anything else. Don't you think so too? And that's exactly what Katt Williams opened up about in one of the rawest, most emotionally honest interviews he's ever given. He wasn't trying to sound noble or act like he's above anyone. He was just being real, being himself. He said something that really hit home. I say a lot of hilarious things, but it costs me every time. And honestly, that sentence carries so much weight. Like, how many times have we laughed at someone cracking a brutal joke or dropping a hard truth without thinking about the emotional bruises they might be taking in the process? It's easy to assume the funny guy's always fine, always strong, always bulletproof. But behind the punchlines, there's often a person quietly bleeding from wounds you can't even see. And that's the thing about Katt. He's never really been the kind of comedian who dances around the truth or sugarcoats things just to be palatable. He says what needs to be said, even when it's risky, even when it ruffles feathers or burns bridges, even when it makes people uncomfortable. He sees himself as a sort of black superhero, and not in a flashy cape-wearing way, but in the sense that he steps up and says the hard things no one else wants to say. And let's be honest, that role doesn't come with applause. More often than not, it comes with backlash, silence, doors being slammed in your face, and people who once called you a friend turning away. So when Katt talked about how telling the truth costs him every single time, he wasn't exaggerating. He meant emotionally, mentally, sometimes even professionally. Being a truth teller isn't just about bravery, it's about resilience, too. And sometimes that resilience gets chipped at. That's why what Janet did, her act of forgiveness, meant so much more than just a simple, "it's okay." It hit different. It cut through all the noise and touched something really human. Because Katt, being who he is, rarely ever gets grace. He rarely sees people responding to his harsh truths with understanding or empathy. Most times, he's met with anger, defensiveness, or flat-out dismissal. But Janet? She did the opposite. She chose to see the heart behind the humor. And let's be real, how often does that happen in today's world? When someone dares to speak the truth, especially in public, especially when it stings, the world is quick to cancel, not to comfort. So when Janet responded with kindness, with softness, it didn't just shock Katt, it moved him. It reminded him, and maybe all of us, that there's still space for humanity in the chaos of criticism. And isn't that what we all need, sometimes? A little grace, a little room to be flawed but honest, to be wrong and still forgiven, to be heard, even when what we're saying is hard to swallow. For someone like Katt Williams, who's built a career around being raw, being real, and being unfiltered, that kind of moment is rare. It's precious. It's the kind of thing that lingers with you long after the interview ends. Because truth-telling might be noble, and it might be necessary, but it's also lonely. And in that loneliness, every act of kindness, every ounce of forgiveness feels like sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. So yeah, Katt's comedy might make people laugh, but it comes at a price, a real one. And seeing someone like Janet meet him in that space with open arms instead of clenched fists, that's something special. That's the kind of moment that makes you believe that even the hardest truths can lead to the softest, most meaningful connections, if we're just willing to look past the words and into the heart of the person saying them. Because at the end of the day, truth tellers are human too, and they bleed just like the rest of us. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.